Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. Improving education in Michigan is a high priority for the governor. We heard it in his State of the State address, and there is intense focus on Detroit schools. A newly formed coalition of Detroit leaders is trying to find solutions. The governor has met with the group, so coming up, coalition co-chair Tonya Allen is our guest, ready to take our questions about the future for Detroit school children. Plus, do you know you have the right to know what the government is doing? We'll talk about the barriers to freedom of information. And some African-American business owners say they're being forced out of downtown Detroit's revitalization efforts. That is all coming up for you on MiWeek, but we do start with education in Detroit. The Coalition for the Future of Detroit Schoolchildren was formed late last year to come up with solutions to many of the issues plaguing education in the city. The members are business, education, civic, and religious leaders. And recently, the coalition launched a series of meetings with parents to get their input on how to fix the schools. Joining us now is one of the coalition's co-chairs and the president and CEO of the Skillman Foundation, Tonya Allen. And of course, we have our MiWeek contributors here with us, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, as always, it's good to see you. Tonya, welcome to MiWeek. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, you are very busy with this coalition. It's 36 business leaders and school leaders and I mean, across the board. Talk to us a little bit about what it's been like to work with people from a vast array of areas, and what are some of the ideas that you're starting to come up with?
Well, the group is basically a coalition of unlikely allies, and we talk about us coming together under this framework of 70-20-10, believing that 70% of all of the things that need to happen in education that we can agree on, 20% will disagree, but we could probably negotiate, and 10% we'll never agree on. But instead of starting at the 10%, let's start at 70 and work our way up, and let's stop fighting against each other and start fighting for our children, especially because we have this window of opportunity, we believe, with state and local leadership that will allow us to eventually really solve the problems that are before us.
Okay, and you have a long list of problems, I think, a very ambitious thing here. So talk to me about what are some of the ideas that you're starting to toss around in these meetings?
So we are working with developing a set of recommendations by March 31st, and we're working on recommendations that will answer these 6 questions really briefly. What are we going to do to resolve the DPS debt? The second is how are we going to rationalize or coordinate all of these various schools in our city? How do we give it some rhyme or reason? The third is, what are the common services we need to provide to all parents, regardless if they go to a charter school, EAA, or DPS? And then the last 3 questions are essentially the same. What's the future state for DPS? What's the future state for EAA as a statewide entity, not a district that works in the city of Detroit? And then what's this future state for charters? And we think if we can look at that in a holistic way and really propose what that might look like and put in the policies and the practices in place to get us there, that we can improve education for kids. And that's our ultimate goal.
But that's a pretty big list right there. I mean, you could spend a couple of years, frankly, just sort of sorting through all of that. What's your expectation for a timetable when we might see something either go to Lansing? Some of what you're talking about clearly will require legislation, but also talking to the governor about, he's sort of working this from his end too.
Right. Well, it is a big list, but none of us are starting from scratch. We've all been thinking about these issues for a really long time. And so what we're trying to do is bring those ideas back to the table, debate them with a diverse set of opinions. And that's the hardest part, right, is debating them and coming up with decisions on a quick timeline. But I'm hopeful that the timeline actually forces us to make decisions that we would not do if we had a year to spend really deliberately thinking about these things.
And Tonya, so you actually only have a few weeks, right? I mean, the governor wants to do this in March. He wants to lay out some sort of plan in his March education address.
Right. Well, he knows that we're going to get it to him by the end of March, and he expects that there will be some legislation or his agenda will be moved in April. We're talking with legislators, we're talking with Detroiters about it, and we're talking with the mayor. We think that it's important for Detroiters to really have a voice in this, even though we know that state policy and practices have a lot to do with the state of education in the city of Detroit.
You had some of the first parent meetings just a couple of weeks ago. Tell us what were some of the feedback from parents in the district?
Basically, parents were saying, I want to have some stability. I want to know that my school is going to be open, that I can depend on it, that they're going to do a good job educating my children. I need some help getting them there, transporting them. I don't know where to go. It's too many difficult processes to enroll my child in school. So they were basically saying, give me a simpler life, give me a simpler shot at being successful for my child. And I think one of the other things that I thought was a really compelling message from them was that a lot of times we talk about school choice, and they want school choice, but they also believe that school choice means I have a good, high-quality neighborhood school, not that I have to transport my child 20 miles to get to one. And that's one of the things that we're trying to resolve.
When you talk about the things that are on your list, they all are focused on governance, which is, has been the foil in Detroit for a long time. We've had bad governance dating back, 20, 25 years, it seems like. But what's missing from that picture obviously is, okay, so what happens in the classroom? What happens to my child when I send them to that school? Is that something you guys see addressing later, or do you feel like solving the governance problem will raise the quality in the classroom?
Right. Well, I think the first set of questions are really about governance. The second set of questions are about academics.
Okay.
And so we expect that we will be able to address that. We have a group of really dedicated educators in all three of those systems of schools who are working on it. So we expect that. But I do think that one of the things we have to just recognize is that without stability, no academic reforms are going to work. And that's been part of our challenges in Detroit, is that we've not had fidelity to anything academically, and that even most schools who are doing the right things academically, they're challenged because they're still dealing with the financial situations that the poor governance model creates for them.
But building off that question, I mean, would seem like the two most important factors in education are the teachers, what happens in that classroom, and what happens at home. And the teachers union just elected a guy as president who said he's not interested in working on any more reform efforts. He wants, a blank check from the state and things to go back the way they were 30 years ago when the district had a couple 100,000 students. And you have challenging environments in many of the homes. I mean, how do you get at those two challenges to improve academics?
Right. Well, I think that it's unrealistic for us to ever think that the district is going to look the way it did even 20 years ago. We have a system of schools. We have less than half the number of school children that we had 15 years ago. We have to deal with the reality of today. And today means that we have a system of schools that are unregulated, and we got to figure out how we give some order to that. And then I think the second thing that we have to face facts with is that Detroit has the highest child poverty rate of any other urban community. When you look at Detroit, we're poorer in some ways than rural Mississippi. And so we are going to have to figure out how we provide some kind of systemic approach to supporting kids and not expecting each and every individual school to be heroic. So I think we're going to have to deal with both the academics, but also really thinking about what's the support system, how do we provide all of those supports to schools and that they don't have to do it all by themselves.
But if the teachers aren't on board, can you make anything work?
Yeah, I don't think that you can, but I actually come from the perspective that most teachers want to be on board. I mean, I think that teachers have been attacked over the last few years, and especially when you look at what's been going on with the unions. Many of the younger teachers who are in the school district, they've been working there for 10 years and they haven't seen a raise and they don't make more than $30,000. And we often talk about the teachers who've been there for 30 or 40 years. And I think we need to stop talking about them as if they're a unified group. We have teachers that are in the charter system that are popping around from charters to charters. They want stability in their classroom. And I think we have to speak to the whole continuum of teachers, not just to the DFT. They are not the sole teachers in our city.
A report came out this week that while you're going through this process of figuring out what will be the next steps, that Excellent Schools Detroit has come up with an idea of an 8-person commission for the schools, that they would decide the opening and closing and also enrollment and transportation. Can you tell us a little bit more about that proposal?
Yeah, so I think that the report that was actually reported was premature. So it was a subcommittee meeting where we listened to 2 different ideas. We got 3 or 4 more coming in the next week in which we're going to debate the ideas. I think that what we are committed to are a couple of things. We're committed to local control. We really believe that Detroiters have to have a say about this. We're committed to having high standards for all schools in Detroit and the same standards for schools. And we're looking at how we, regulate the system of schools. So we haven't gotten to an answer yet. And we had a proposal by Dr. Padroni. We're going to have one by 482 Forward and others who are thinking about these issues. So I can't speak to that because the coalition hasn't really wrestled with that idea in the way that it was reported in the paper.
Are there any models around the country that you're looking at in other cities saying, you know what, that can work in Detroit?
Yeah, we're looking at places like Washington, D.C. We're looking at places like Denver. And what they're doing in those particular places is that they have a compact relationship between the district and the charters. People are working towards the same goals, and you understand that you're sharing the marketplace. Now, the difference between those places and Detroit is that they're not fighting tooth and nail to survive because there are too many schools and too many seats. The supply and demand is not out of whack. And so we have to get that straightened out so that we can actually have a governance system that works.
So, Tonya, if you settle on putting the schools back into the political environment, what happens to school choice then?
Well, I think what we're looking at is actually how you protect school choice. So this is not about how you limit it, it's how you protect it. How do you make sure that supply and demand are appropriate? And we're also trying to look at how you help people navigate the choices. And I think it's just like any situation where people have to choose very complicated things, like if you had an investment portfolio, if you're not given some kind of architecture around choice, it's very difficult for you to make the right decisions for yourself because you don't have the right questions, you don't have the right advice. And what we're trying to do is create that for parents, helping them make those decisions and to use the architecture to help them access high quality schools. And the last thing I would say is choice by itself is not the solution. We got to have equity in choice. So if you can't get to a good school and a good school exists, then is that really choice? If your only choices are two bad schools that are around the corner from your house, you don't really have choice. And so that's what we're trying to achieve.
Well, we'll be looking forward to the work that's going to be coming out of the coalition. Tonya Allen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.